I'm really curious about something. You talked about states, specifically Utah. The treasurer is on plan to purchase $180 million of gold, if I understood that correctly. How many states, JP, do you know how many states own physical gold as part of their treasury right now?
Currently, at this moment, Ohio is the only one that has gold on its balance sheet, to my knowledge.
Okay.
Like I mentioned, Texas recently divested from a position that it held. The reason Texas held about $1 billion, they stored it in New York in the COMEX. They built the Texas Bullion Depository with the hope that that bullion depository would get COMEX approval, and then instead of paying for storage fees out to a bank in New York, they could bring the gold itself home. I think ultimately they decided not to do that. But yeah, Texas is one famously that for the last 12 years or so has been pushing this forward as far as state investment in precious metals. And there are, so those are the three, Texas, Ohio, and Utah. But those are just the ones that have already done. Oh, excuse me, Tennessee as well passed legislation this year empowering their state treasurer to invest funds in gold and silver and conducting studies to establish an in-state bullion depository and various things like that. So, and those are just the ones that have actually passed the legislation. There are also states that have considered legislation like this that maybe it hasn't passed, but with the passage of time and with support continuing to come, because so long as you believe that the dollar will continue to be devalued, gold and silver are a pretty safe bet. So over time, these arguments become on their face even more obvious. And that has been our experience across the country. And I think, especially now with gold being, 2,400, upwards of 2,400, you're seeing, I'm hearing from people, elected officials in these states saying, oh my gosh, we passed legislation. We haven't made our first gold purchase yet. Look at how much we've lost in this time. Or, wow, when you were coming and advocating for this policy, gold was at $1,800. And you were telling people, you were making the arguments about how, between COVID spending and just general deficit spending of the United States, inflation is going to harm the dollar. The dollar is going to lose its purchasing power, and gold and silver are going to win out. And now here we are, a couple of years and 35% increase in the price of gold in that time. So it's not, just individuals. It's states themselves are very much waking up to this because they realize that, the status quo that is America's monetary system is unstable at very best.
Real quick break here, guys. If you are a mining investor, you are without question familiar with the Golden Triangle region in British Columbia. This is one of the most prolific mining regions in the world due to its vast deposits of gold, silver, and copper. Now, for the last 4 years, Dolly Varden Silver has been busy expanding their high-grade silver deposit in the Triangle. And they are backed by some of the smartest investors in the silver business, including the legendary Eric Sprott, Hecla Mining, US Global Investors, Fidelity, Delbrook Capital, Sprott Resource Corp, and more. If you are curious why the smartest money in the silver business is cozying up to Dolly Varden Silver, then hit the link beneath this video. Yeah, that's such an interesting trend if that picks up, states continuing to add gold to their treasury, because you always have to ask the question why. And you can say, well, central banks around the world have been doing that in a record number for the last 24 months, setting 50-year records of their gold acquisition pace. I think the reports of them dumping US dollars are overblown, but what I do believe is that they are de-risking. I mean, that's when you diversify your assets like that, you are just de-risking from something. And it would be very obvious to anybody who pays attention what they're de-risking from, and just building an optionality, right? Which is what gold provides, because it's the only asset that's not someone else's liability. It's globally liquid. It's all of these things. It's the lifeboat.
It's a stateless money. Right?
It's a stateless money.
It's a money without a ruler.
Okay, so right there. Now, what if American states began to do this in greater number? what would the message there be? And what would that be a signal of, I wonder? Do you think about that? Because when these things happen, I always like to say, this is not an event. So Utah is going to add $100 million worth of gold to its treasury. That's not a standalone event. It's probably part of a trajectory. Now, what is the trajectory? What is the shift that's happening? And so could you extrapolate and say, we'll probably see more of this at a state level? And if we do, let's read between the lines here. Here's what that means.
I think it is perfectly reasonable to consider that this trend that is happening in the United States on the state level, that's actually started in Utah back in 2011. The original sound money bill that passed on the state level happened in Utah. I guess that's 13 years ago now. It is perfectly reasonable to believe that this trend will continue because the momentum is so obviously on the side of pro sound money legislation here. Be it the removal of sales taxes or capital gains taxes or commercial activity taxes on dealers, be it legislation that reaffirms gold and silver as legal tender or establishes an in-state depository or empowers a state treasurer. All of these things, all of these legislative notches that we're winning along the way, I think ultimately the end goal here is a reestablishment of, more than anything, just an individual's gold standard.